The radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. The radical. Fundamental principles
This is
of
the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show. Third day in a row. All right, and today we've got, it's basically an open Q&A. We've got our generous supporters on the line. We're supposed to have another couple of people joining, so we'll see if they join. Otherwise, it's just the three of you. And we have, of course, SuperChat lines open, open Q&A, so you can ask about anything. It's there's a lot going on in the world, quite a bit going on in the world. So there's plenty to talk about. And my podcasting app is struggling to stay connected. See if it stays connected. Come on. Oh, wait. We're live. All right, cool. There we go. Emmanuel, there he is. He was supposed to join. And we got one more. We'll see if they show up or not. All right. So we'll get rolling. We'll take questions from our panel here. We'll start with Jim.
Hello, Yaron, and hello, everyone out there. I'm going to keep this fairly simple today. I don't have any curveballs to throw at you. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Very simply, what do you think are some very good ideas or quotes or essays that very well reflect certainly the outcome of 2020 as a year and where we are today, especially as distinct perhaps from past decades? What do you think from Ayn Rand well represents today?
From Ayn Rand. Well, I mean, I would
otherwise too.
Yeah, I mean, everything Rand wrote is obviously relevant and both inspiring and depressing and relevant to what's going on right now. In particular, I would look at The Voice of Reason. She's got two sections there. She's got a section on culture, which is, I mean, it's amazing to read because basically everything she said back then is right on. And you've got, essays like The Intellectual Bankruptcy of Our Age, Our Cultural Value Deprivation, which is brilliant, Global Balkanization, which is all about tribalism. So perfect for our time.
The Fascist New Frontier.
Fascist New Frontier. Is that in that book?
I don't know, but that's what comes to my mind when I think of this age.
Yeah, that's another one. Fascist New Frontier. You've got Assault from the Ivory Tower, the Professor's War Against America. I mean, this is what, 1972 or something, and she's already seeing it. Epitaph for a Culture.
What's that?
Epitaph for a Culture, and then then in the politics section, you've got Antitrust, the Rule of Unreason. You're going to see a lot of antitrust already have seen. I mean, the Trump administration went sued both Google and Facebook. We'll see how those, the one that gets us all into trouble about a woman president. That's always fun. But all of these, how to fight against socialized medicine, hunger and freedom, the American School, Why Johnny Can't Think. That's a Leonard Peikoff essay that is part of this, part of The Voice of Reason. The Pull Peddlers. Wow. The Pull Peddlers talk about what's going on right now in Washington and the cronyism. So tons of content that is relevant. And I've suggested in this past, but I think partially to stay sane, partially just to keep sharp and not to get caught up in the little stuff that's going on, all the minutia of American politics and culture today. I'd read an Ayn Rand essay every week, one essay a week. Just
That's a good idea. What would you say for somebody who's relatively new and maybe has only read some of her fiction? What are some of the best ways for someone who's new to access and find some of these many essays?
Well, a lot of them on the Ayn Rand Institute website for free. So if you go to the Ayn Rand Institute website on the campus, I think, and these essays are free. So, and you can read them online for free. Otherwise, you can, I've got them all downloaded onto my iPad, and I can just flip it open and read any essay I feel like anytime. Yeah, I would definitely download books like The Voice of Reason, Philosophy Who Needs It, Virtue of Selfishness, Capitalism Not an Ideal, and then just read an essay a day, an essay a week. And when you run out there are other places you can find more essays, or just go online and read an essay a week up there until those get exhausted. There's plenty of essays overall.
She was incredibly prolific. Thank you.
Cool. Jennifer.
What do you think is more common for someone to misinterpret Ayn Rand's ideas? Like a common one is that selfishness means you don't care about anybody else or something like that. Is it more common to misinterpret it and then attack the misinterpretation, or to actually understand it and honestly think it's wrong?
So say that again. I'm not sure I understood.
Do you think it's more common for someone to misinterpret the philosophy and then attack that misinterpretation and say, oh, I don't believe it's right because it means this, even though it doesn't mean this, because you're mistaken? Or someone to truly understand it, but truly think it's wrong?
Oh, I think the first one is much more prevalent.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it's very rare for somebody to actually exhibit understanding of the philosophy and then make an argument against it. That is very rare for me to see. Most people who argue against the philosophy begin by misrepresenting it and then arguing against a straw man. It's rare that people actually argue against what the philosophy actually says. Unfortunately, I'd love to have critics who actually understood the philosophy and could actually, debate you on it, but it's very rare that you get that.
Does Malice have anything worthy to say?
Not that I've seen. I mean, in his interview with Lex, he strawmans Ayn Rand's vision of morality. He strawmans a vision of politics. I mean, no. I mean, anyway. I don't think Malice is a serious thinker. I mean, he's fun. He's funny. He's interesting. He likes to jump on these bandwagons and often lead them, particularly if there's a burning of somebody or burning of something involved. So I think he got on the bandwagon of the Reddit mob. So I think he's much more. Yeah, I don't think there's anything original or serious there. He's got a sense of humor and he's very knowledgeable and he's smart. There's no question about that. But he misrepresents Rand as almost everybody else does. Yeah, Jonathan, your turn.
Well, first of all, Yaron, thank you for all these heroic shows you've been doing lately, especially on the GameStop issue. Really unique, interesting perspective. And as you said, you're providing a voice that no one else out there is, and a rational voice. Rand makes a big thing about the difference between political and economic power. And one element of the GameStop story that I thought was so interesting was as you pointed out, an investment in a hedge fund that lost a lot of money. Melvin Capital lost a lot of money, and basically investors, but it got played as a quote bailout.
Yeah. And
I've heard from a lot of people on social media, I didn't get bailed out like this hedge fund got bailed out. And it made me think, there's no distinction now in the public's mind between political power and economic power. And I thought maybe you could speak a bit to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, political power being the power of the gun, economic power being the power of trade. And as you know, I mean, as we can imagine, Melvin got $2.5 billion or $2.75 billion from Citadel and Point 72. We know Point 72 and Citadel didn't just give Melvin the money. They didn't just lend Melvin the money. They basically took a chunk of Melvin's business. They, if this was any other business, people would be upset because Citadel and Point 72 exploited Melvin's what do you call it? Bad situation to take a big piece of equity, right? To take a piece of it, but because it's finance, it's a bailout, right? But if it had been any other business, it would have been an exploitation, because I'm sure that Melvin got out. Melvin got clobbered, but in Citadel in .72 came out way ahead on that deal. The fact is, Melvin is a very successful hedge fund. The guy who runs it is a veteran of the hedge fund business and has been very successful. He was a protege of the guy who runs Citadel, and that's part of why the connection there, I think. So that's one sense in which there was no bailout. There was an investment on terms very, very, very good to .72 in Citadel. And it strikes me as bizarre that these people who are so anti-hedge funds are somehow think that these hedge funds would bail out another hedge fund, and bailout being, I don't know, a bailout. Think about what a bailout is. A bailout is the government takes taxpayer money, gives it to bankers, or gives it to a company with no expectation of any kind of return or any kind of profit. Believe me, Citadel and .72 expect a profit and a return for the money they put in.
And I think and I don't want to monopolize the time, but that it's the concept. There's a package deal here, because we're including bailouts, like when government bailed out private businesses, with a recapitalization, I think is how you described it. It would be of private money, and in too many people's mind now, there's no distinction between private property and so-called public property, economic power, and
absolutely, and you're absolutely right, because it's being used as a package deal. It's being used to connote something that doesn't belong at all. A bailout is when a government is using taxpayer money to allocates taxpayers' money to private business, right? When the private business is in trouble, that's a bailout. I can't even imagine what a bailout would look like in a private context. There is no such thing. There's an investment, there's a gift, there's a charitable contribution, but there's no bailout. Bailout requires government to take taxpayer money and give it away. So there's purposeful confusion between public and private. And I think absolutely right, Jonathan. There's purposeful confusion between political and economic power, because when you have that confusion, it justifies more government intervention, more government involvement. And of course, that's what's going to result from this. I mean, you can see both AOC and Ted Cruz agree that government has to do something about what is going on in financial markets. And
isn't it amazing, this ubiquitous hatred from the left and the right of hedge funds now?
Particularly anything related to finance, they hate, and particularly hedge funds, because they're successful and they're big. And they make money. And truly stunning, but not surprising at all. Not surprising.
More specifically, they're seeing short selling as somehow predatory. Across the board, everybody is seeing this as predatory.
Well, that's true. That's been true for a long time. Short sellers have always been viewed as villains. During the 2008 crisis, there was a period where short selling was banned. They literally didn't allow short selling, and to this day, and they made short selling more difficult. So to this day, it's more difficult to short sell. It was already difficult before the financial crisis. So no, short selling's always been viewed negatively. Betting on somebody failing is un-American, I'm told, and therefore needs to be restricted and stopped. But
does that mean everyone who goes to a closing soon sale is a predator?
Well, no, it's not exactly the same, because your actions are not helping the closing happen. So if you stop going to the store because you don't like it, and it fails because you're not shopping there, that would be more of what I think they think of. But yes, it's.
Well, and just quickly for the record, hedge funds are always blamed. They were blamed for supposedly ginning up oil prices in the mid 2000s and crashing
too low.
So it's all, they're always to blame, the profit seeking, and it seems to be that's why.
Unfortunately, historically, there was actually one semi bailout of a hedge fund. And I mentioned this the other day on the show, and that was in 1998, Long-Term Capital, which had positions that were leveraged. I can't remember, it was 90-1 or 95, some ridiculous amount. And they would have been fine, but because of the Asian financial crisis, there was suddenly all prices moved in all at once together, and they just got wiped out. They got wiped out. And Alan Greenspan, the famous Alan Greenspan, who unfortunately is associated with Ayn Rand, brought all the bankers and the kind of big hedge funds into his office and basically said to them, I'm not going to bail these guys out, but you guys should. You guys should really do it. I'm suggesting, says the man with the bazooka pointed at your face. I'm suggesting that you bail these guys out. And indeed, they did bail out Long-Term Capital. I mean, Long-Term Capital ultimately closed. But they bailed them out. And that was the beginning of a lot of regulation, a lot of pressure to regulate, and maybe the entrance of this idea that that hedge funds are being bailed out. But in fact, of all the industries out there, hedge funds are least likely to be bailed out. They have, I mean, do you remember the days, Jonathan, where hedge funds were lightly regulated, or if at all? I mean, in the early 90s, in the late 80s, there was barely any regulation on hedge funds. And today, I mean, it's pathetic how much regulations you have and what you can and cannot say and how you have to comport yourself. And I mean, particularly if you register with the SEC, which you have to if you manage assets above a certain size, it just gets to be a nightmare. And it's taken a lot of the fun out of the industry. I know a number of hedge fund guys who have retired because it's just not as much fun because the regulations are so heavy. All right, thank you, Jonathan. Emmanuel.
Hey, Ron, and incidentally, Jonathan, I really enjoyed your episode on AR, the Arnhem Center in the UK. Hearing about your background and careers was really interesting. Hopefully, we hear more about.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Not to get on your own show and compliment you, but
no, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
You're on something I've been wrestling with for a long time, and you mentioned it on a few episodes of the long-term implications of massive government spending. It's challenging to communicate or even to understand really what those impacts are. The day of reckoning of inflation really has not happened. You mentioned things like that sort of spending has destructive, really harmful economic impacts. And I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on how to measure, how to identify. You mentioned too, the Fed does all sorts of things to distort and hide impacts of inflation, but would love to just hear your thoughts on how we better measure and understand.
I mean, the tragic fact is that it's very, very difficult, maybe impossible to actually measure it, right? Because we don't have an alternative universe in which the Fed didn't do what it did, it's hard to tell what would have happened, right? And so because the effects of the Fed's behavior much more have to do with what investments happen versus what investments don't happen, have to do with the fact that the economy grows slowly because so much money is spent on consumption rather than investment. It has to do with the fact that a lot of companies that should go bankrupt and free up their capital and reallocate it and stop wasting our time, in a sense, by selling us products, time and money and effort, are still in business. I mean, this crisis, the number of zombie companies today that are in existence because the Fed has bailed them out repeatedly, really since 2008, is stunning. So how do you measure the drag on economic growth of companies that should not exist, right? The companies that are running are barely paying off their debt, only can pay off their debt because interest rates are so low. And during 2020 could only pay off their debt because the Fed basically bought their debt, bailed them out to a large extent. What are called zombie companies. I don't know how many they are. There's probably hedge funds that should be shorting them, but also probably afraid to short them because they won't go bust as long as the Fed bails them out. So it distorts things in so many ways. It's so difficult to tell what could have and would have happened. But that's the main thing. So it doesn't pop out. Another example, right? Without the Fed, I believe that prices would be dramatically lower today in almost everything that we buy. So the purchasing power of your dollar would be significantly higher, particularly, things that are imported, particularly things but generally things that are in the marketplace. So our standard of living would be higher. But again, how do you measure that versus what? Because our standard of living is still increasing. It's just not increasing very fast. And I'm saying it would increase really fast. And people go, yeah, but how do you know that? That doesn't, right? So there's no measure of it. And that's partially how they get away with it, right? Because if people could actually, if they had a mirror that showed them what the world could be like, at least some of them would desire that world and would fight against it.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way of thinking about it. I guess even on a simpler, and that all makes a ton of sense as well. Even on a simpler note, I mean, CPI, if the quantity of money is increased, chasing the same number of goods, you would expect to see price inflation increase. I mean, so all the economic effects you're describing make a ton of sense, but why is it that is CPI not a good measure of price inflation, or are there other?
Well, first of all, if short of the Fed increasing the money supply, prices would drop, then the increase in the money supply might be just raising prices enough to keep them stable. So why is CPI 0 the ideal? CPI is Consumer Price Index, right? And there are lots of other measures. That's just one measure, but you can measure inflation. PCE, which is the something cost. Anyway, I can't remember. But there are lots of these measures. But if those were going to drop, and you're increasing money, then maybe they're stable because. And I believe that given China's entry into the world economy in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, that prices should have dropped dramatically because global productivity, which is what matters in a globalized economy, global productivity went up dramatically. And in a world in which the dollar is the reserve currency, you can print a lot of dollars as global productivity is going up significantly and not drive prices up because productivity is driving prices down faster. So the fact that it's flat is one. Second, since the financial crisis, at least, people have not really been engaged. The velocity of money has been low. Most of the money sits in bank accounts. Most of that at the Fed. So a lot of the money the Fed so-called created just sits in reserves. It never entered. So now I think it's going to be different because. So here's a thought which comes out of modern monetary theory, which I hate to give them credit for this, but there is a certain truth to it, right? I'm speculating here, but see if this makes sense, right? In a world where interest rates are close to zero, I'm most interested in what Jonathan thinks of this. In a world where interest rates are close to zero, bonds are money. They become money, in a sense, money, because you can easily monetize them because there's government bonds, right? Because there's no risk and no inflation and there's no interest rate risk because the interest rate is as close to zero as possible. So they are almost money substitutes. So is it inflationary if the Fed buys bonds? You could argue that by buying bonds, it's replacing one form of money with another form of money. And that the real inflation is caused when the government runs deficits and creates the bonds, not when the Fed is buying. So in a sense, QE, by the Fed just buying up a bunch of bonds already in distribution, didn't increase the money supply in a traditional sense, because they were just replacing a money substitute for money. Now, if bonds are trading at 10% interest rate, then they're not money. They're not money substitutes, because they've got risk, there's inflation, and they're getting income. But when they're trading at below 1%, right, which your treasuries are, right, what's the difference, right? I could go to the casino and hand in a government treasury and get cash and get chips and reverse. And people do that all the time. They use their bond portfolio as collateral for all kinds of investments and stuff. So the money's there already. What is really increases the quantity of money is massive bond printing. And bond issuance. And while the government has been running deficits over the last decade, those deficits have been nothing as compared to what it's just done over the last year.
Isn't this essentially?
I would say the current stimulus, the 4 trillion, maybe going on 5, maybe going on 6. We'll see what Biden gets. This is truly inflationary, not what the Fed is doing, but what the central bank is doing, because it's creating new money by creating these new bonds, some of which are being bought by the Fed and being turned into cash, but most of which staying bonds. But with interest rates close to zero, which the Fed again is doing, they're basically money, and that I believe is going to be inflationary. That's why I think this time you are going to see a spike in prices. Global productivity also is not increasing at the same rates it was in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, or even over the last 10 years, because China's slowing and Africa hasn't picked up yet, although some increase in productivity yet. And there's some increase in productivity in Asia, but it's just not on the same scale as it was. So if I had to bet right now, I think this time it will be inflationary. How bad? Hard to tell, partially because you have to factor in increased productivity in all these other countries, which I don't think most economists do. Sorry, Jim, you were going to say something?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I kept interrupting you. I'm reminded a little bit of what I've learned recently about the Social Security lockbox works. Tax dollars come in, Social Security Trust Fund literally uses them to buy bonds, yep, which then pays the Treasury cash, which that it can then spend on whatever. And all they have is this bond equivalent.
Which means all they have is IOUs.
Yeah.
So the lockbox at Social Security has IOUs from the federal government. Now, the IOUs are good because the federal government can print as many as they want. But at some point, there has to be a point where the government is going to have to face, the federal government will have to face this dilemma. Either we have hyperinflation because we print huge amount of money, or we default on the debt. Now, it's true that these bonds at 0% interest rates are money already. But if interest rates have gone up, which you'd expect them to go up as they, as they're just pouring in more and more money in, as Social Security is broke and everything like that, then interest rates are high. Now you're issuing money to pay back, to buy the bonds. Now you're creating a ton of new money. Now it's hyperinflationary. And would the federal government default on its obligations? And while MMT claims governments that have printing presses don't have to ever default, that's true. But hyperinflation is arguably worse than defaulting.
Yep.
So at some point that happens. You can't tax your way out of this. So Daniel says, hyperinflation, default, or tax. You cannot tax your way out of it. The amount of debt they're taking on is so large that who are you going to take the money from? There's just not enough people to take the money from. You could tax all the rich at 100%. You wouldn't get the money you need to pay off the debt. So, and once you start taxing the middle class, I mean, basically you're giving the middle class money, right? That's what Social Security and Medicare is. It's the middle class, the entitlements are middle class redistribution of the wealth. The redistribution of the wealth towards the middle class. So that's why that's why they're untouchables, right? If these were for the poor, they would be touchables. If these were for the rich, certainly they would be touchables. That's why the Democrats are very smart. Anything you do to the middle class, you can never touch again. So if you want a social program, You want forever. So the government has control forever. You do it for the middle class, whether it's a tax cut. They always cut taxes for the middle class. They don't care about the poor. They care about their voters, and their voters are middle class. All right, let's do some super chat. We've got, as you know, I give priority to those over $20, and we've got a few of those. So we'll do a few of those, and then later we'll do the ones that are less. If you're entering a market full of cronyism, is it immoral to use political connections to your advantage? I mean, it depends. It depends to what extent. So I would say this: if it's to your advantage, in a way that in a free market you would have a shot at doing anyway. So if you truly have a superior product and you're being blocked, and you're going to the government and using political connection to free you up so that your product can really compete, then it's okay. But if it's for a product that couldn't compete in a free market, then no, then it's not. I mean, the analogy a little bit here is like, I don't know, Ayn Rand was asked, I think once, is it okay to go work for the government? And she said, it's okay to go to work for the government if the work itself is a work that would actually occur in a free market, right? Maybe by private enterprise, but the work itself is a productive work because it would happen in the free market. And this is why I don't think Alan Greenspan should have gone and become chairman of the Federal Reserve, because not only wouldn't there be a Federal Reserve, there would be nothing equivalent to a Federal Reserve. And therefore that job is a job that is purely the creation of the statist. And therefore no objectivist should go to do that job to the extent that he ever was an objectivist. So it's look, that's a hard call to make. When is it okay and when it's not okay? It's not an easy call, and sometimes you have no choice but to participate in the cronyism because your survival is dependent on it. In terms of DIM, is tribalism a D or an M phenomena, or perhaps potentially both? So I'm always hesitant with DIM because it's a complex theory. I encourage you to go to the original, to Leonard Peikoff's The DIM Hypothesis. Anything I say doesn't represent Leonard, doesn't represent the book, necessarily my best understanding. I think tribalism is an M because it's an integrating principle. It is integrating around something false. That's why it's a misintegration. But it is the something false is the tribe, the nation, the flag. It rejects, it integrates all the individuals, everybody's values into one set of values. The values should be guided by the tribe, right? A disintegration would be the false kind of individualism the left advocates, which is a hedonism and nihilism, and do whatever you feel like doing. It's what conservatives describe as individualism, which is funny. Like conservative nationalists, the one who want us to integrate over the nation, describe individualism as whim worshippers. Whim worshippers are disintegrated because there's no principle on which to integrate their ideas, to integrate their principles. Everybody does their own thing. It's the hippies. It's today's left, far left. It's anybody does their own thing with no guiding principle to that thing. Now, again, on the left, there are M's, but M's that have only appeal to the little tribe, like critical race theory. It appeals only to one little tribe, and it splinters everybody else. And that's why, again, DIM is complicated, and applying it to all these different phenomena is very difficult. But I definitely think tribalism is a misintegration. Okay, one last one, and then we will go back to the super chat. All right, follow up on short selling. if there are 100 shares outstanding and short ratio is 100, these borrowed shares are sold to someone else. Doesn't that mean also 200 shares long, even though only 100 exist? Yes, in a sense, but they're not counted as 200, right? So I don't think they're counted towards the float. The float is the float is what they measure the amount short against. The float is the shares outstanding that are available to trade, right? Not all shares outstanding available to trade. They could be, for example, in the vault of the company that issued the shares. The float is what's available to trade. And I don't think they double count them there. So if you've got over 100% short, it's because the same stock was shorted more than once. Now, supposedly, the clearinghouse or the broker, when it wants to short a stock, is supposed to make sure that the stock is not owned by more than one person. That is, that the person who owns it didn't get it by buying it from somebody who had borrowed it. But in a fast-moving market, I'm sure it's not clear that they actually keep track on that and they actually can pull it off. And that's why you get, I think, short positions of 140% of the float. I think it's because these stocks are shorted more than once. All right, I think this is $20, but I'm not sure. We'll do this one quickly. Well, we've got it. Should a family business with several owners in the family donate to charity? Or should the charity be up to the individual shareholders receiving the dividends? I think it's easier for the individual family members to do it unless the family agrees unanimously. So if the family agrees unanimously, then that's ideal. I don't think companies with shareholders should donate to charity. I think the shareholders, as individuals, should donate for charity, either from capital gains or the dividends. But a family business, if you've got a limited number of shareholders, they could vote. And if the vote is unanimous, they could do it, or you could do it through dividends, as long as there's consent. Let's see. I made a comment on your JP, Jordan Peterson, love clip. I have love clips. This is cool. And promised a $20 super chat. Just hope to see you guys discuss your competing descriptions, ideas of love. I honestly don't think they are too different. Would love to see common ground. Look, I know you guys would love to see common ground, but I don't think there is. I mean, Jordan Peterson has very, very, very different philosophical perspective. And I don't know why some of you want to whitewash that. He's in metaphysics and epistemology. He is far, far removed from objectivism. And that manifests itself in morality. And morality, to him, Jesus is a superhero. To me, Jesus is a sad victim of an evil morality. That is about as different as you can get. If you've heard my interpretation of the biblical stories, they're diametrically different than Jordan Peterson's description, understanding of the biblical stories. We have completely different way of looking at the world because our metaphysics and epistemology are different. And there's a sense in which we both advocate for personal responsibility. But I think that there's a vast difference even there between the kind of personal responsibility I'm advocating for, pursuing happiness, and his, which is forget about happiness. Happiness is impossible. Just survive, just somehow bear through it. So yes, in the actual advice, some of it sounds a little the same, but I think there's much more difference than you want to accept. Now, beyond that, I'd love to have a sit down with Jordan Peterson. I'd love to talk to him. Sometimes I feel maybe I'm a little ill-equipped to deal with him because I do think the conversation goes very quickly to epistemology, which is not my forte and not my strength. You can see that in the discussion we had with Jordan Peterson at Ocon, where I did not have a good answer to his challenge in epistemology, and I should have. So it was my failure. So that would be my only worry, is I don't rise up enough to do that. But I would love to hash it out with Jordan Peterson. So the way to get me to hash it up with Jordan Peterson is to go to Jordan Peterson and say, please have Yaron Brook on your show. Here's some topics it would be fun to hear you guys discuss. And do that in a nice, respectful, non-aggressive, non-hounding him way, right? Just once in a while, drop him an email or drop him a chat or whatever it is he has. Hey, Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute. It would be really interesting to have you guys chat about love, about self-interest, about capitalism, So yes, that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. And the guy who asked the question says, Big Worm, says he's actively doing this, and that's great. That's great. And others of you who are Jordan Peterson or actively listen to Jordan Peterson, please do the same thing, and maybe we can do this together. Thoughts on the silver squeeze WSB is trying to pull up? Yeah, I mean, no different than a squeeze in the stock market, right? It's not done for any particular purpose. It's done because they've noticed a lot of shorts there. It's done because there's some history where some investment banks try to corner the silver market historically, and they're out to get. I think they're going to have a harder time when it comes to silver. We'll see. I think they think the market is still like it was in the 90s when I think it was the 90s when the two investment banks dominated the silver market. I think they'll find that the silver market today is much deeper, much broader than GameStop, and that they will find it much more difficult. But look, this is a nihilistic. I mean, part of it's motivated by some people at the core who just want to make money. And fine, they found a way to make money. If they do this long enough, they'll lose it all. That's my prediction, right? But some of it is motivated by this nihilistic hatred of capitalism, hatred of investment bankers, hatred of Wall Street, hatred of hedge funds. That's completely inappropriate. That's completely wrong. And I wish them ill. Those people doing it for the money. I don't care. It's the markets. They can go in. They can try to squeeze all the shorts. I think if they do this, it worked a couple of times. Good for them. They made money. But if they keep doing this, they will lose their shirts. They will get crushed. But those of them, like the libertarians and the leftists, and libertarians and leftists go hand in hand on this one. Those of them who are doing this out of a hatred of hedge funds, out of the hatred of capitalism, out of a hatred of the status quo, those people should rot in hell. And the best way for them to rot in hell is to lose money big time. And by the way, as I said on my show yesterday or 2 days ago and 4 days ago, Wall Street is printing it right now. They're making a fortune off of you guys. You guys think you're hurting Wall Street? That is the biggest joke ever. Citadel loves the volume, loves all the money they're making off of your trades. So keep it up. All right, Jim.
All right, bit of a technical question, and I wish Alex Epstein were here. He might have some thoughts on this regarding the oil industry. I've heard all my life that the oil industry receives huge subsidies from government. Certainly in many countries, this is true. But I've recently started questioning this, and I've heard an interesting claim from representatives of the industry that the only real subsidies that the oil industry receives are tax write-downs as deductions that really every business can deduct, depreciation essentially. I'm keeping an open mind on this, and I'm wondering, do you think that the oil industry, at least from American perspective, actually does receive subsidies?
No, they don't. And I've been in debates where this has been brought up and done a little research on it. Yeah, they get all kinds of tax write-offs. Some of them might be unique to the industry, but not unique in a way that other industries don't have their unique write-offs. So it's all in the tax code. The only other thing that I've heard mentioned, right, is a lot of the drilling happens on government land. So they get favorable leasing terms or something like that, whatever the hell that means. But favorable as compared to what? Why
Like
do they
the
even have
logging
to
industry.
lease? It's not exactly. I mean, this land should be privatized. It should be sold. And I don't, so no, there's no subsidies. And then when you take into account all the regulations, all companies building a pipeline, and then Biden comes into office and shuts it down, and all that investment gone. Who cares? All companies are planning on leasing in Alaska, and Biden comes in and shuts it all down. So it's absolutely the case that they're not subsidized. They're crippled by government. We would have much more innovation, much more progress, much more dynamism, and much more profits if they were left alone than what we have right now.
No doubt. Thank you.
Sure. All right, Jennifer.
Do you think the word civilized, when used in regard to human beings as opposed to animals, people will say animals are not civilized and people are. Does that mean humans use reason and animals don't? So would that be, is that a good, if you're trying to explain to people what living by force would look like, is it useful to say, well, that's what animals do? Might makes right, and they beat each other up and they steal from each other, and they're not
Absolutely.
civilized?
Absolutely. And they eat each other. They eat their own young, like lions eat their cubs sometimes, or other males' cubs with the same female. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a great example. I think this, drawing the distinction between human beings and animals is very useful, because fundamentally what differentiates human beings from animals is reason. And reason is what makes civilization possible. That is, civilization is reason in action. It's the idea that we're better off trading than beating each other up. It's the idea that we can change the environment to fit our needs. So we can build high rises and get oil and convert it into plastic and convert it all these things. That's civilization. Or we can write music. We can take objects in reality, reshape them, and turning it into something that creates sound waves that we found appealing. Somebody actually asked me, here's a question I got from the music one. Have you seen videos of people playing an instrument on the edge of some woods or near a farm, and the cows or woodland critters gather around a musician? What do you make of that? It sounds like a Disney movie, but it's probably true. And that's, it doesn't surprise me that animals there's a lot of the brain that is the same between human beings and animals. And it wouldn't surprise me if the music is in some way resonates with something in their brain, causes some kind of chemical or some kind of response that is favorable, and therefore they want more of it. I mean, who knows? But certainly with animals, I've heard claims made about plants that I find more suspect. But certainly animals that have senses, that have ears, that have sense vibration in the air, a sound, could have the appeal of music, but they can't write it. They can't produce it. That's what civilization is. It's the application of our unique capacity to reason, which means to think, which means to choose, free will, which means to change our reality, create, build, make. And that's civilization. And that's definitely what differentiates us from the animals. And force is a big aspect of that.
Yeah.
Animals can only deal with one another, can't reason with one another. They can't argue. They don't have courts of law. Other than in Dr. Dolittle. I don't know if you watch Dr. Dolittle.
Yeah.
The old one. There's a new one. I haven't seen the new one, but the old one was, I used to love when I was a kid. All right, Emmanuel.
I was surprised to hear you recommend A Random Walk Down Wall Street, one of my super chat questions the other day. If I remember that book correctly, the first half is very critical of fundamental analysis. That, I mean, this is your PhD in finance, so you know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. But that academic papers show that forward PE ratios are not pretty good predictors of future earnings and that sort of thing. And I know Jonathan is, I think you're a technical trader. The part I find really hard to get my head around is that fundamental analysis assumes this convergence to the intrinsic value of a company over time. That as you analyze a company, you're looking at discounted future cash flows, but there is no one right price for a company, as you pointed out yourself too. Like there isn't that convergence that necessarily has to happen.
Well, there is ex post, right? There is after the fact, after you know the outcome of of cash flows, you can. So there is one reality that plays out versus other realities. So there are always losers and winners in the sense that some people get the price right, some people get the price wrong. The people who get the price wrong have less money at the end of the day and therefore influence markets less. The people who get the price right have more money and influence the price more. But look, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that book to a professional investor, right? I wouldn't recommend that book to somebody who's going to work at a hedge fund. It's irrelevant to anybody working in the hedge fund. Because what somebody working in the hedge fund is trying to do is trying to figure out what the right price is and get in so that they can make money as it moves in that direction, whether it's a short or a long. That's the beauty of a hedge fund. You can play it both ways. So if you think GameStop is overvalued, you can short it and see if you're right. And if you're right, that reinforces your conviction and your confidence in doing it again. And to do that, you need the fundamental analysis. But if you're some kid who's 25-year-old and stuck in his mom's basement because of COVID, and you got some stimulus money or your parents are rich or whatever, and you open up an account in Robinhood, and you shouldn't do fundamental analysis because you don't know anything. It's not fundamental analysis what you're doing. What you're doing is you're pretending. You're playing a game. You think you can compete with Citadel, with the traders at Citadel, who really do fundamental analysis and really look at these prices, and with the technicians like Jonathan who are going to move on different price movements, right? And you can't compete with that kind of stuff. And no matter how much you study. Now, granted, if you're Warren Buffett and you can figure these things out and you buy and you hold for the long term and you can make a lot of money. But most people are not Warren Buffett. How many Warren Buffetts are there in the world? Like one. So the reason I want people to read Random Walk Down Wall Street is to get the message of you're not going to beat Wall Street unless you're pro, and of course, markets are efficient to the extent that they're efficient only because somebody's doing the fundamental analysis to make them efficient. But that someone has the resources and the smarts that are far greater than 99.99% of the people who day trade. That's why almost all the people who day trade that I know lose money, ultimately.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, for a professional investor, someone like Jonathan, if there's one reality and ultimately fundamental analysis is a tool in trying to understand the intrinsic value, why are there so many seemingly mutually exclusive trading strategies that seem to work? Why do technical traders, fundamental quant funds, they all seem to have completely different approaches in taking positions, and yet they all have, they all seem to be successful.
So first of all, I don't know if all of them how many of them are successful, right? So you'd have to actually run an empirical study and look at them versus benchmarks, and actually look at them versus benchmarked or versus a diversified portfolio over that same period of time. And there have been studies, and I think the studies show that most hedge funds are not successful, right? There are 5,000 hedge funds out there. Most hedge funds don't return a risk-adjusted good return to investors. A few do, right? But it's unusual, right? Now, the market is diverse enough and deep enough and complex enough that there are lots of different strategies where you can make money. But that's because it's all over the place, right? There's so much going on. But you can, and then over what period of time are people making money? Like every tech stock, every tech fund in the world right now has made a fortune over the last year. They're way up. Every single tech fund. Is that because they're smart? Is that because they're fundamental analysts? No, it's because all tech stocks went up. Almost every one of them went up dramatically. So if you compare them to the benchmark, are they that good? If you compare the benchmark and take into account risk, probably not. A few are good because a few could find the exceptional, but on a risk adjusted basis, how many people, even hedge funds, how many pros beat the market? Very few.
Thank you.
And we know, for example, with mutual funds, that it's not repeatable. Past performance is not. Past performance does not indicate anything about future performance. Doesn't tell you you're going to be the fact that you were good doesn't say you're going to be good, or that you're going to be bad, and being bad doesn't mean anything either. So you could argue that mutual fund performance is for the most part is flipping a coin. It's just luck. And then with venture capital, we do know past performance is indicative of future performance. So there's something different about venture capital, that it's exclusive. I think a lot of it is access to deal flow. Because there are a lot of smart people, but deal flow matters. And if you get the better deal flow, you're going to do better, right? If the better people come to you to ask for capital, you're going to look at the better deals and you're going to fund them earlier, and you're going to get in. It's part of what explains Sequoia and Kleiner. It's not that only that they hire really, really smart people, because they were now on at least generation 3, maybe 4 relative to the founders. But it's because Sequoia has a name. So if you're going to start a company and you're really, really smart, you've got a really, really great idea, who are you going to take it to? Number one, Sequoia, and then everybody else, in Kleiner and some others, everybody else underneath it. And then in hedge fund business, it's not clear where the past performance is an indicator. More than mutual fund, maybe less than venture capital, probably. So again, it's even for the really, really smart guys. I don't know how Renaissance, if you follow hedge funds, Renaissance Technologies, I don't know how they do it. And they lost a lot of money in 2020, but that's the first year they've ever lost money, and they made so much money in past years. It's unbelievable. I don't know how they do it. If I knew how they did it, I would do it, right? I would hesitate for a second to do it. But they have astounding, the best, I think, Jim Simmons, best, and I've met Jim Simmons, best hedge fund in the history, right? I don't know how they did it. I don't know how Point72 and Citadel do it. I don't know how they do it on the scale. Like, I can understand people making a lot of money on a small hedge fund. I don't understand how it's done on a big hedge fund. I don't know how they do it, but there's obviously enough inefficiencies in the marketplace, and they can make a lot of money on very small inefficiencies, doing it over and over and over again, that, and they've hired the smartest people on the planet. They can do it. I can't. My niche,
super helpful. Thank you.
I need to be in a very, very small niche with deep, deep expertise to be able to do what I do. So, and it's still hard, but yeah, I don't understand these big firms and how they succeed.
Rentech is really inspiring. They really pioneered, the whole space of quantitative analysis and finance, and applying the scientific method to portfolio construction and all that. And
yeah, but what's amazing about them is not that, because that, others do that. It's the fact that they can repeat it, and they can do it. And the other thing is they can do it on scale. That's stunning. That you can do it on scale is stunning. It's quantitative stuff. I understand, to some extent we do, but the scale that they do it on, and the number of markets that they in, that to me is amazing. And it's not, somebody says Bernie Madoff made money for decades. They're not Bernie Madoff. They're not Bernie Madoff. Everybody knew Bernie Madoff was fishy. This is not fishy. This is just genius. Even in finance, you can find real genius. And I know some finance professors would say it's luck, but yeah, I don't buy that. All right, Jonathan.
You're muted.
Hey, you're muted.
Thanks, Yaron. Two quick questions. You reported, I think, on a previous show that Dr. Peikoff had come home from the hospital. I wondered if you had any update on that. And then also, Ayn Rand famously loved Godiva chocolates. It was a favorite of hers, kind of a special treat, as I understand it. I wondered, what's your equivalent, that one little special, maybe sweet treat or something else that's your Godiva chocolate?
Wow. So just in terms of Leonard Peikoff, he is home. I spoke to some people who talked to him yesterday. He's doing much, much better. It looks like he's over this. It looks like he's going to recover. I think there's very low risk of, it's still hard and still, need for oxygen, things like that. But overall, he's in a good mood and things are good. I've tried to call him a couple of times and haven't got through. Hopefully call him today and have a more extensive update, but it seems good. And it was quite a scare because I didn't think he'd make it. I did not think he'd make it. Given his age, given his pre-existing condition, given the disease profile, I did not think he would make it. So I'm glad he did.
Awesome.
Yes. Let's see. Oh, my favorite treat. Yeah, super chat questions at $500 a pop. What's my favorite treat? I like chocolate. I like chocolate, but the problem with it is that I've been off sugar for 15 years, and most sweet things I can't eat anymore. So my if I do chocolate, I do 95. I've got in the closet here, I've got 95% cacao chocolate with almost no sugar in it. Really, really, really dark chocolate. I love fruit, and I have to watch it because I love fruit too much. So a great mango or really, really good berries. I love passion fruit. Passion fruit on papaya or passion fruit on watermelon. You should try that sometime. Passion fruit on papaya on watermelon, the kind of acidity and bitterness of the passion fruit versus the sweetness of the watermelon and that's good. I generally, probably much more than Ayn Rand, I like good, interesting, unusual food. So I like going to crazy restaurants that serve you nutty stuff. And I like little portions. I like the flavor. I like stuff like that. So, yep. Linda likes 90% chocolate too. Mine's 95. 95. And I've tried the 100. The 100's a little too much, but 95 I can do. The 95, there's a Lindt, the Swiss chocolate Lindt, 95%. That's really good. You can get it at CVS, of all places. The chocolate gourmet place of CVS. You can get Lindt Swiss chocolate, 95%. That's quite good. Yeah, baked to lactose chocolate soufflés. I used to love those things. Can't eat it anymore. Way too sweet. Used to love cheesecake. Can't eat it anymore. Way too sweet. My wife makes these pumpkin pies on Thanksgiving, and she puts in like a quarter of the sugar that you usually put in, and those are fantastic. Those are really good. So you have to. For desserts, I have to have very little sugar in them. Otherwise, I don't like them. All right, let's do some super chat. Do you think the drastic decrease in violent crime and drastic increase in technological innovation over the last 60 years can only have happened because of because the philosophy and the culture has gotten better? The trend started around the time Atlas Shrugged was published. Well, no. So drastic reduction in violent crime started in the early 90s, so about 10 years after Ayn Rand died. The increase in technology, That's been around since the 19th century. Depends what kind of technology. But electronics started around the time of the publication of Atlas Shrugged, but that's just because things were evolving. I mean, if you read about what was going on in Bell Labs, and I'm reading a book about Bell Labs, which is fascinating, and how they got to the point of developing the transistor and ultimately, the computer chip. It was an evolution that started really in the 19th century and of science and technology. So I don't think you can attribute that to Atlas Shrugged. I do think there are areas in the culture where things are better than they used to be. Technological innovation continues in spite of the bad philosophy in our universities to some extent because of the impact of Atlas Shrugged. That I think is true. The business success, the 1980s and the revolution in business and everything that happened in business during the 1980s and then the 90s, which were very good for American business, I think happened partially because of Atlas Shrugged. I think generally people's attitude towards self-help and the legitimacy of self-help and the self-help is okay and pursuing your own happiness is okay is to some extent because of Atlas Shrugged. So yes, there is an underpinning of influence in the culture underneath it all that is Atlas Shrugged, that can be attributable to Atlas Shrugged. And maybe that translated also into the decline in violence. I think the culture of the 80s, the culture post-Reagan, during Reagan and post-Reagan, really shifted. It really shifted to individual success, to being successful and making money, and that was good, and to business, and to entrepreneurship, and to engaging in reality. And so I do think that might have also had an impact on reducing crime. People went to work. People aspired to work. Work had a positive vibe. And part of that, not directly, but indirectly, part of that is Atlas Shrugged. I don't think Ronald Reagan would have got elected without Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged changed the culture underneath in ways that are hard to measure and hard to really see. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Which from a sense of determinism and class thinking and whatnot, and towards individual responsibility for you commit a crime, you get punished for it, seems to me to be the biggest contributor to the change in crimes in the 90s.
It's hard to tell because if you look at the statistics, if you look at the empirical evidence, it's not clear. So people have looked at that. Yeah, maybe. But it's not unequivocal. It's not slam dunk that is the reason. So it's hard. There's a lot of things. Fewer young people, longer sentences, being tough on crime. But I also think there was a cultural shift where crime was less acceptable. The kind of policing, community policing, the intolerance for even small crimes. So all of that, I think, combined, but nobody has a definitive. I recommend the book, Better Nature of Our Angels, Better Angels of Our Nature, by Steven Pinker, who really delves into the issue of crime. But I do think there was a cultural shift, partially to get tough on crime, partially among people who otherwise might have been criminals. Where does ambition come from? I answered this question like 2 shows ago or something. It comes from having clear values and having clear understanding why one wants those values, why those values are pro-happiness, pro-life, pro-you. So it's having clear values, knowing what your values are, and knowing why your values are good, because we could have values that are not good. Right? But knowing why they're good, why they contribute to your life, why they move you towards happiness, that's where ambitions come from. That's where passion around ambition comes from. And some people develop that. I know what my values are. I know they're good very early, and they're ambitious from day one. I want to be the best because they take their life seriously in some way, fundamentally early on. But it's exactly that. It's values, and I want to attain them. They're not just going to be fantasies. They're going to be values. I'm going to go for them. And I care. That's ambition, I think.
And it can grow and it can shrink over time too, depending on cultural influences.
Well, depending on your choices. My friend told me he subscribed and clicked the bell notification for your channel the other day. Cool. Soon we'll have Elon Musk following. Your friend must be quite impressive if you're jumping from your friend to Elon Musk, but I'll take it. Let's hope. I just need more is my, just more. That's the key feature. Subscription growth is slowed again. So it goes through these periods, and right now it's pretty slow. So any friends of yours you can encourage to subscribe would be great. What is your favorite essay? And which one do you find the most useful for day-to-day living in terms of Ayn Rand? I mean, Virtue of Selfishness at the end of the day is probably my favorite and the most useful in some ways. What is Capitalism is one of my favorites because it's hard. Every time I read it, I see different things. I see her mind is just astounding. And that essay is a great example of it. Really, really hard essay. But Virtue of Selfishness, generally, the essay there is the objectivist ethics. But the Virtue of Selfishness book is most useful for day to day, and the essay is most useful for guiding your life. And the rest of the book kind of breaks it down for you and gives you more particular, specific guidance. Let's see. Can a publicly listed and traded corporation opt out of having their shares traded on the options exchange? No, it's not up to them. The company doesn't determine whether there'll be options or not. The exchanges do, and the exchange will do it, or the market makers will do it if there's enough interest. So not every company has options. It depends on the level of interest. So if there's going to be a market in those options, the market maker will make that market, but the company has no say in the matter. I sent you a link on Twitter to a video on Ayn Rand. It's a couple of weeks old. Already has over 130K views. I'd like to hear your commentary. It's a horrible video, a standard horrible video about Ayn Rand. It would be, I don't know. It would give it too much credence for me to show it and comment, I think. It's all the same old bogus accusations against her. I'll look at it again. Maybe I'll do a show on it. I don't know. It's just too despicable to actually interact with. This climate crisis fraud being perpetrated by the experts impact the credibility you give to the public health experts re-COVID? Well, yes and no. I mean, I am skeptical of what experts say, and I can go and judge for myself with regard. And I also have experts who I trust, both in terms of climate change and in terms of COVID. I have friends who are doctors. I have friends who are epidemiologists. You saw one of them yesterday on my show. I have, my father was a doctor. I have some knowledge, minimal. I wouldn't use it, but at least I know what they're talking about when they talk about biology. You can also, I know statistics. We've talked about that. I've looked at the climate crisis data. I've looked at it. It's not that I don't believe the scientists. I don't believe the experts. Some of them are right and some of them are wrong. Some of them are doing it purposefully, fraud. Some of them are doing it innocently. They're just mistaken. They're wrong. And then I look at COVID. I look at the experts who tell me, I don't know, that it's made up, that it's not true, or that it's bogus, or the numbers are wrong, or whatever. And I analyze what they say, and I analyze what they say, for example, based on my knowledge of statistics. So if somebody, I watched this video of this German epidemiologist that's touted as this genius and great epidemiologist, one of the greatest in the world, and so on. And he's skeptical about a lot of stuff about COVID, and then he gets to an explanation about false positives. And I do the math, and he's wrong. Now, false positives are a pretty basic statistical issue that any world-class epidemiologist shouldn't get wrong. It shouldn't take your Ron Brook finance guy to identify that you're wrong on your false positives. It takes a little, you know, you can draw it on a page and you can see it. So now I say, ooh, if he's wrong on this, maybe he's wrong on all the other stuff. And then I hear from other people who I know that he's wrong on the other stuff. Okay. But when I hear somebody like Amish Adalja and everything he said about this coronavirus has come true, I haven't caught him in anything wrong. The numbers match up to what he predicts. I look at Taiwan, I look at South Korea, I look at Vietnam, I look at China, I look at the United States. Okay, I can understand what's going on. Some of it we just don't know, just like with climate change, we don't know. Some of it, stuff with COVID, we don't know. But the fact is that when I look at the evidence from the experts on climate change and the experts, first of all, what do the experts actually say on climate change? That's an interesting question too, because what you're fed is a lot of propaganda. Do the experts actually say that climate change is going to cause catastrophic loss in the next 50 years? No. I mean, might be a few experts here and there, loonies, like the loonies who claim there's no COVID. Most experts say that there is a warming of the planet because of CO2, which I think is true, but it's not an emergency. It's not a crisis. It's the globe is going to heat. We can cope with that heating. And they're not expert on coping anyway. All they can tell me is this: if there's going to be heating, then I'm more of an economist than they are. And I know how an economy can adjust to more heating. Who cares? Is my approach to more heating, right? So I think it's true that the globe is warming because of CO2 emissions. I don't think it's catastrophic. And I think we can cope with it easily. COVID, I think it's true that some of the response to COVID has been nutty and insane and authoritarian and wrong. Lockdowns, for example. But COVID is real. And I know people who almost died from COVID. I know people who have died from COVID. I know people who are being vaccinated now. It's not that hard to visit an emergency room in Orange County and see people in a COVID ward. And you're thinking every nurse in that ward, every doctor in that ward are participating in a fraud. They're pretending. Give me a break. So COVID is easy. It's right there, right in front of you. Just go on bulletin boards and read what doctors say about COVID. Not the freaky German guy, not 1 in 1,000 guys, but generally. And then, don't believe the panic, the people who panicky either. The people who tell you that we all got to lock down and, you got to wear a mask in your own home when you're feeding the dog. That's absurd as well. So you got to find the right balance, what's logical, and obviously lockdowns are not working and lockdowns are a violation of individual rights. So take that into account. All right, let's go back to Jennifer.
In regards to that question about the crime that someone just brought up, do you think that that's reversing now? I mean, the last few years.
Only in 2020. 2019 was still a very low year. It's only 2020 that it reversed, and I think that's because of the lockdowns.
Okay, so you don't see that as a trend that the police.
We will see. Maybe it is. It could be that the culture shifted, and we're getting worse now. But I'd have to see a few years of data to see that it was a trend.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, that's it.
That's it.
Okay, Jonathan.
Let me take a pass for one more pass your run. I'll get you on the next round through.
All right, Jim.
All right, really difficult question here. Make you be the travel and tourism expert on Puerto Rico. What are your favorite restaurants in Puerto Rico?
Oh, favorite restaurants in Puerto Rico: Marmalade in Old San Juan, Vianda, Cucina Abierta, and Mario Pagan.
These are mostly Italian?
No, none of them are Italian. Not one of them is Italian. And Mario Pagan also has an Asian restaurant called Raya, which is excellent. So those would be my 5 my 5 favorite restaurants in Puerto Rico that I, go through on a weekly basis. So
They're all nearby for you.
we're regulars there in all of them, so they all know us, and they know what we like, and we're part of the family. So yeah, there used to be more great restaurants in Puerto Rico. A couple of them shut down because of COVID. Some chefs left. One shut down before COVID because while I loved it, nobody else seemed to have. So hopefully some of them will come back in the months to come, as the island recovers from COVID and has to recover from the bankruptcy and recover from everything else. Okay, let's run through the super chats. I think people hear Nietzschean tendencies in Jordan Peterson's talk and kind of liken its superficial individualism to something similar to Rand. Yeah, I think that's right. There's something there, but yes, there's something of that, and it is superficial. But that's as soon as you get away from the superficiality, you get the conflict with Rand, and you get the differences with Rand, and you get the disagreements. What is your purpose for the new podcast you're planning? How about we delay that until I launch the podcast, and then I'll tell you the purpose. And as I said, it won't be just a podcast. It's going to be a Substack. So and you'll get essays, you'll get a newsletter, you'll get a whole variety of content, not just for me. So when we're ready to launch, we will launch it. But the purpose ultimately is to change the culture's attitude towards technological success, to get them to understand where it comes from and why it's good. So where it comes from and why it's good. And to change the world's attitude towards progress, economic progress, technological progress, and where. So I think one of my business partners said his goal is that if anybody ever built a guillotine in front of Jeff Bezos's house again, they would be ridiculed by every part of the culture. That's my goal. But more on that, yeah, it's still at least a month away, and probably the podcast 2 or 3 months away. The newsletter and the articles will start coming out probably a month from now. So probably early March. And then the podcast will probably be launched in April or May. We'll see. When you short a stock, is there a time frame in which you have to pay back the borrowed shares? Somebody say something? Is there a time frame by which you have to pay back the borrowed shares? Could the hedge fund who lost the GameStop wait 5 years for GS's value to come back down? Theoretically, they could, because the way it works is one time frame is when the person asks for the share back, right? You borrowed the share in order to sell it. So when they ask for it back, then you have to go buy it in the market and give it back to them. Now, theoretically, you could then buy another share, but not buy another share, borrow another share and short it again and keep the short going, in a sense, roll it over. So that's possible. You could keep doing that. If the guy never asked for the share back, again, theoretically, you could keep it. However, what the real constraint is that the broker, the bank, through which you did the transaction, because a short you can lose an infinite amount. There's no cap on how much money you can lose. They're going to get worried that you're going to go bankrupt, not be able to buy back the share and give it back. So they're going to start requiring you to put up margin, to put up some money in an account to show that you can buy the share. And as the stock goes up, you're going to have to put more and more and more capital. And this is costly capital because you have to put this up. You can't use it to do anything else. And it's just sitting in a bank account, just as collateral to cover, what's happening with the short if it keeps going up. So that's where the short squeeze happens. It happens because No, I can't keep putting capital aside. I might not have enough capital to put aside. And that's what happened to Melvin. I don't have enough capital, and I can't afford to put the capital idle in the side. I can't liquidate everything else I'm doing and put it all. So I have to buy the share and pay and return it and walk away from the deal. So it's the margin call which kills you. And indeed, remember that this is essentially the same kind of activity that caused Robinhood and all the brokers to stop trading on Thursday. Jonathan had some good tweets on this, and was retweeting some stuff that other people had written that was very good on this. Basically, you have to put up collateral in a market like what we experience. You have to put up capital to make sure you're good for the trades. And who's going to put up the capital? Not the client, because the client never actually gets the stock. It's the brokerage house that does it, because the broker's the agent of the client. So the brokers and the clearinghouses had to put up massive amounts of capital to back up the stock purchases. And they didn't have the capital. This is why on Thursday night, amazingly, Robinhood went to its investors, including Sequoia Capital, and raised $1 billion in one night. $1 billion. Why? What do they need $1 billion for? They're not investing in software. They're not hiring more programmers. They needed the $1 billion to act as collateral for the clearinghouses. And by the way, brokers are not allowed to use client money as collateral. So if you have money in your account, that by law, Robinhood cannot take, in a sense, the money from your account and use that as its collateral. It can only use capital. So the whole story about Robinhood and about all the other brokers was completely wrong. And market players, so this is stunning. If people at CNBC and people at Fox Business got this wrong, that's stunning, because this is not rocket science. This is basic knowledge of the way markets work. And so, the disinformation about this is again, it's not from experts. It's from people who wanted to create rumors and wanted to use this as an excuse to create, conspiracy theories. All right, Jonathan, did I get that right?
Yeah, actually, and I remember my question. It's a quick follow-up. I know you've talked a lot about GameStop, but you've talked as well in the last couple of months about the politicization of everything, and the politicization of masks and COVID. And it seems as if now this whole GameStop issue is now become another example of politicization. Either you're kind of on the side, supposedly, of the little guy, or on the side with the corporate suits. And I just don't understand it one bit.
I think
absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. It's not so much Democratic Republican, because I think you're seeing a lot of Trump supporters and a lot of far leftists and a lot of libertarians all on the side of Reddit. And anybody who supports Wall Street is just a supporter of the status quo. And I think you saw the Peterson, I forget his first name.
Austin.
What's that?
Austin
Peterson. They just want to see the world burn. And I think that people on the far left and the people on the far right and the people on the far libertarian, I guess, they just want to see the world burn. And this is another opportunity to see the world burn. And they're convinced, and they're convincing their followers, that the world is being manipulated by the man, by some group somewhere on Wall Street, in Switzerland, in I don't know where, right? But there's some group cabal that is manipulating the world, and Reddit is going to bring those people down, or Trump was going to bring those people down, or I don't know, what's his name? Bernie Sanders was going to bring those people down. But it's all motivated by this. The little guys are constantly being screwed by this elite that controls the world. It's the same conspiracy theory over and over and over again. And this is what happens when people are alienated, when people are afraid, when people don't have an explanation of what's going on in the world. and it scares them, they look for the simplest, cheapest explanation. And the simplest, cheapest explanation is, it used to be God. God is angry with you. That's the Old Testament is full of this. The Jews used to, bad stuff used to happen to Jews, and they'd go, what's happening? Why is bad stuff, like locusts or whatever? Why is bad stuff happening to us? They say, oh, we must have done something wrong to God. Let's become more religious. Let's sacrifice a bunch of sheep. Let's do all these things and grovel before God, and it'll go away. But that explanation didn't work too well. So then it became, it's the Jews' fault. They did it. So let's kill a few Jews and it'll go away. And that lasted into the 20th century as an explanation for the world whenever you got alienated, like Germany after, but all through the 19th century, as capitalism caused people to be alienated, not for the Marxist reason, but because the world was changing faster than they could cope. The world demanded from them to think. The world demanded from them change. The world demanded from them to become human. And they wanted to stay animals. And they were looking for somebody to blame. It must be the capitalist. It must be the Jews. It must be the rich. It must be the businessman. It must be the some cabal or something. There are really bad people out there who are trying to manipulate things, but the world is not run by them, not effectively, not efficiently. They're central, they're not that good at what they do, and there are too many disagreements among the devils out there to have one devil in control of everything. So.
I do think we're going to have huge show hearings in the House and Senate very soon over all of this.
Oh, yeah. They're going to bring the financiers over, and they're going to tell them, this or this about short, naked short, this short, that short. And then if only one financier, I don't know if I could pay them. They make more money than I do, so I don't know if I could do this. But if only one financier just stopped for a second and said, Congressman, could you please define what a short is? So I know, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Or could you define what a call option or put option is? Did your staff prepare you to make a definition of that? Maybe that idiot of a woman from Orange County who always has a whiteboard out and is always accusing and always drawing. Maybe she can draw for us how an option works and how option markets work and how you clear a call option and why does a call option put price pressure on the stock. That would be the highlight of my decade if some businessman did that to the politicians. Just ask them, just show that they don't know what the hell they are talking about. They have no concept, nothing, zilch. All right, let's see, 2 more questions. Any basic finance 101 reading recommendations for us aspiring traders? Don't trade. No, I'm kidding. People keep asking me about this. Jonathan, do you have good reading recommendations for aspiring traders?
The only one I'd recommend would be Reminiscences of a Stock Operator.
Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. Yeah.
By Edwin Lefebvre.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of Edward Lefebvre. Yeah. Do you believe amateur trading is a good idea? No, I don't. I think it's a bad idea. I think if you enjoy it, then do it as entertainment and have a budget and assume you're going to lose the money, right? But, Jonathan's a pro. This is what he does. He spends, other than the time he's doing interviews, he's spending his life thinking about, like a surgeon, right? You wouldn't go and do an amateur surgery, right? A surgeon studies and he practices and he thinks about and he refines what he's doing constantly. It's his profession. Jonathan is a professional, and this is what he does. And you don't just dabble. You can't be successful. You can get lucky. You can go to Vegas and get lucky, right? But you're not. So I'm against amateur trading unless it's for entertainment. Just like I'm against gambling unless it's for entertainment. If you go to Vegas and you have a pot and you say, I know I'm going to lose it, and you might not, you might win, but I know I'm going to lose it. I can afford to lose this, but it's fun doing this stuff. It's fun doing it. Then fine. I don't have fun when I'm losing money, so I don't like gambling. But look, I don't trade on my own account. Like all my money that I have in savings is either in my fund or I've given it to a pro who has basically diversified me in a bunch of mutual funds, and I never think about it. Once a year, I look and see how it's doing. Once a year, and that's it. I wouldn't trade, right? Even though I think I know a lot about the markets, because I know who's on the other side. People like me, people like Jonathan, pros. I mean, professional investors love. And again, I'm not speaking here as a professional investor. I'm not speaking here as a representative of my hedge fund. I'm not speaking here as a finance guy. Generally, as a pundit, I mean, look, hedge funds, they like markets in which amateurs play because there's a lot of price movement that they could take advantage of because amateurs don't necessarily know what they're doing. There are going to be, I can guarantee this, hedge funds that make a fortune. No, let me rephrase that. There are already hedge funds that are making a fortune and will make much more of a fortune off of GameStop, off of what happened with GameStop. Yes, Melvin took a hit. Others are going to make a killing. All right, last question. Speaking of food, you mentioned you don't eat bread. Well, I cheat sometimes, like last night. Last night, Vianda, one of the restaurants I mentioned, makes this sweet potato bun. It's a little bun. Oh my God. It's with butter. If you put in a slab of butter on it, it is so good. So twice a week, I cheat in Vianda and in Mario Pagan, because Mario Pagan makes this challah, right? Brioche kind of bread. It's so good. And it's right out of the oven. They're hot. And again, you slather with butter. It's so good. But yes, generally, I don't eat bread. If that grows throughout the public, what would all the wheat farmers do instead? Yeah. I mean, I think we should force me to eat bread. I mean, because if I don't eat bread, it's going to destroy the economy. So you're absolutely right. This is how coercion gets into the system, right? What about those wheat farmers, those poor wheat farmers? You got to eat your bread you're on, not because it's healthy for you, or tasty, but because of those wheat farmers. The wheat farmers will have to figure out something else to do. The same thing will happen to them than what happened to the buggy companies and workers at the buggy plants. They went and worked at automobile plants and got paid a lot more money. It's exactly what happens to farmers generally. How many people, and I'll end with this, how many people farmed 150 years ago? What percentage of the American population were farmers 150 years ago?
95% or
95%. What percentage of the population of farmers today?
It's like 3%.
Less than 1%.
Oh.
And they produce a lot more food than 95% did because they're so much more productive. So what happened to all those farmers? What did they do? We should all be crying for them. And the population of the world is much, much bigger, much, much larger. I don't know what happened. What did they do? They all became programmers. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you probably Tuesday. We'll see. There'll probably be some GameStop stuff to talk about because who knows what happens between now and Tuesday. I hear that the Reddit mob is after silver, the price of silver. So that might create some interesting stuff. All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Great show you're on.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jonathan. See you soon. Bye.